Hello, everyone. This is criminal profiler Pat Brown, and I've just finished watching District Attorney Raymond Tierney of Suffolk County tell us in his press conference why they have arrested and charged Rex Heuermann. And first, I want to say this because I often critique officials, police chiefs, and district attorneys who stand in front of the camera to speak to the public. And sometimes I'm very bothered by how they put information out. And I think they sometimes have too much emotion. They're not clear enough as to what they want from the public if the case is still ongoing, and they sometimes leave too much information out that they could have put in that would clear things up for people. And if they can't give information, they should clearly explain why they can't give that information up. I thought this guy did a sensational job. Totally impressed. Very, very clear. Went through all the information that they could give out to us, the evidence that they had, and I was impressed, very impressed. And I'm very impressed by the team they put together in 2022 that has brought this guy down. If this is, he's not guilty, proven guilty yet, but that brought this guy to their attention, and all the evidence they've collected that led them to be able to charge him. And they're very, very confident they have the right guy. And from what I'm hearing with the evidence, I'm pretty confident they have the right guy as well. So I'm extremely impressed with the investigation in 2022, which was a huge task force, and using so many people and with so many different types of skills. Hooray. That's all I can say, hooray. I like to see great police work. And this was it at that point in time. Now, some people say, well, why didn't they do better back in 2010, and all that? And there's a lot of blame that went out to the police department. And at the time, you have to understand how serial homicides work. They're very difficult cases, first of all, to solve. There's so much pressure from the public and from the media. And a lot of times people who get the cases, they have never seen a case like this before. So they're doing their best, trying to handle it, but have no necessarily any training in serial homicide investigation. And so sometimes it goes south. And the other reason they may not have done so well back then is they didn't have the technology. The DNA technology and some of the stuff they use to find these burner phones that are connected with him. They didn't have that. So sometimes you have to come back to a case. That's why you can't just say, oh, well, you give up, we'll never revisit. Because as time moves on, sometimes you can get more abilities to solve cases. And so this is what happened in this case. Now, as far as the evidence goes, it's interesting. His attorney has already spoken. He said, I didn't do it. And of course, defense attorney says, hey, we don't have all the information in yet, and we're going to go to court, and that's what will be presented. He's not guilty at this point in time, proven guilty. So it should stay out of the court of public opinion and all that. So I'm not going to say he's guilty. But I'm going to say, with the evidence that they have, he sure looks like he may well be found guilty in a court of law. Now, what do I think is really strong about the evidence? Well, first of all, he's been connected to 3 of the Gilgo Beach women. And the number one thing that got him connected were hairs on these women's bodies, tucked up in the different bindings. And those aren't things that could have just been on the ground accidentally. Okay, that's not going to happen. And they're with all 3 women. So it's not like he could say, well, I hired one of the women and, I paid her and we had a good time and maybe some hair transferred over. Okay, maybe once, but twice. What, 3 times? Okay, now it's not likely. Supposedly this hair is, if I'm incorrect here, I apologize. It has similarities enough to his wife's hair, and that's how they came to him. Okay, so his wife's hair, it's him and hers, and surely the defense attorney is going to argue the statistics and DNA of DNA and all that stuff, and the possibility it isn't her hair, and so on and so forth. But it wasn't the women's hair of the victim. So that was very interesting to them, that these hairs all match on these women, and to them, to the prosecution, seemed to be a match, to a good enough match. And I'm not going to get into all the percentages, to his wife. Okay, so now we have a theoretical connection to this man. What else did they have? Well, apparently he had 7 burner phones. And what happened was a different burner phone was used for each one of the victims to contact them. And then after the woman was killed, the burner phone was ditched. And so I say I'm not going to get into major details of this. There's a lot of information going to be coming out where it's going to be all detailed, but I just want to bring up the basics. So he had burner phones. Now I'm going to say this. Most people don't have 7 burner phones, And the next thing they found out was that he indeed was hiring women for their services, sex services, which again puts him in that situation where, there's another connection. And some of this, the defense attorney was trying to say, well, that's just, circumstantial stuff. Okay, you can say that. But when you get a whole lot of circumstantial stuff together, it means something. So now we have a guy, they believe the hair of his wife was at the scenes. Burner phones, they had all these burner phones. He is using those things for hooking up with prostitutes who are selling their services, sex workers, if you want to call them that. And then we have, apparently they were able to get his Google searches. And what were on his Google searches? Well, he had 2 different groups of Google searches. One was, they said about 200 searches where he was searching what the task force was doing. And actually, this was pretty amazing. He said they kept this so dead quiet. And it was quite amazing because none of this information really came out, that they were working and doing all these things. But he was searching, trying to find out what the police were doing to find the killer of those women. 200 searches on that. Now, he could have just been a true crime buff, but let's add that on to the other circumstantial evidence. And then his other group of searches. Well, let's put it this way. He's heavy into porn. That is violent porn, bondage porn, porn of women being raped, porn of women being murdered. Okay. He has legally, as long as it's over 18 porn people, it's not illegal for him to watch those things. But it is interesting that he has that kind of sexual interest, shall we say. So that's another piece of circumstantial evidence. And then this is probably the biggest thing, and how they even identified him. Well, first of all, let me talk about the phones. They did all these, kinds of things, that charting things with the phones. And they found phones were in a box, and where he lived was in that box, and where he worked was in that box in New York. So he had these 2 locations where he fit with those phone areas that the phone calls were going and coming from. Now, then what they had was this. I didn't quite clearly understand exactly how this went down, but supposedly there was one woman went to some guy, and he paid her for services, and then she was playing a con on him. So after she got the money, somebody would burst in, or a couple guys burst in and said, "What are you doing with my honey?" or whatever, or some kind of, and then the guy's all freaked out, and then they run off with the money, and she doesn't provide the services. Well, he was described quite much exactly like this guy. That was a description. And then one of the most interesting things was what he drove, because there was also a vehicle that was found, and it was what I think it was called a first edition Chevy Avalanche pickup truck. I don't know my vehicles, and I'm not looking at any written information at the moment. And that's very interesting to me. They found that vehicle, Apparently, it had been sold eventually. It's down in South Carolina. They've got that vehicle and they're looking through it. And why do I think that's important? Well, because one of the things I've said about this crime is that I believe very strongly the guy drove a pickup truck. Why? Because of the fact these women were in burlap bags. Now, by the way, they mentioned that they said, well, it got around the internet that the burlap bags were connected with gardening. And he said that wasn't even correct. The burlap bags were the kind of, they were camouflage bags. So they weren't the color of sand, they were the color of camouflage. So they mix in with the weeds better. And they were used for duck blind hunting. I actually didn't realize that they were that color. I had mentioned it might be when I talked about the burlap bags. I said, well, we don't know what they were used for. There could be something used in construction, something used in gardening, something used in hunting. But I'm not a hunter, so I mentioned a few of them, but I didn't even know they made camouflage bags. So that's fascinating. But I believe that if you're putting these women in bags and you're taking them to the dump site, I just didn't feel like that was a kind of container you put them in if you're going to put them into your vehicle, inside your vehicle, like in the back seat. Because if you're driving a car, that would be one place, and it's kind of a crummy place because it's going to get your back seat all messed up, possibly leaving DNA, blood, whatever else. And really, if your family uses that vehicle, you really don't want that body in the back seat, especially he's got a wife and kids, right? But you can put that in the trunk. But again, you run into this problem where you have to clean out the trunk, because if you don't want to leave evidence, you can do it that way. I'm not saying you can't, but for a serial killer who's smart enough, they're going to look for some ways to make sure that they don't leave evidence connected to them in the vehicle they drive. So my belief was it was a pickup truck, because you put the body in the back of the pickup truck, and when after you dump the body, you go home and you just hose the back of it out. It's very easy to clean. So I believed he had a pickup truck, and apparently he did. One other thing I said about this guy was that this kind of guy who went to all this work is very, very sadistic. And I have these two groups of serial killers. I differ from the FBI. I have fast and slow. Fast is usually the guys that don't have such strict structured lives. They don't necessarily have their own home. They may be married, but a lot of times they don't have a wife. They don't have kids, but kind of just running around someplace. Or the Jeffrey Dahmer, it's like they're kind of sloppy in these things. But actually not the Jeffrey Dahmer type. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that. Jeffrey Dahmer is more in the slow category, because he lured people to his apartment and he killed them there, and he went through all kinds of processes. I was trying to think of somebody like Danny Rowling would be a better example, because he was a Gainesville Ripper. He broke into people's houses and killed them there, and then went on his way. And sometimes he was camping out. He was committing other kinds of crimes. He sometimes lived at home, sometimes he lived someplace else. He was kind of a mess. And he went in and he committed the crimes and he ran off. Somebody who takes them back to his own home. And this is the thing, he had to, because it's not like he jumped out of a bush and killed somebody and just left them there, or broke into their home and left them there. He took them to his home to brutalize them and rape them and kill them. You have to do that. You have to have a good, solid place to go. Usually it's not an apartment, because it's hard to get in and out of. So usually it's a house. You then have to either live alone, or if you have a wife, or if you have a wife and children, you have to not do it when they're in town. Because unless you've got some kind of like garage in the back, you have to make sure, like, oh, you're going to go visit your sister. Great, take the kids. And then that's your moment, and you go do that. Well, it turns out his wife was out of town each time those three women were killed. The wife and children were out of town. So that does match up quite well what I thought it would make sense. Now, that is, again, the defense attorney will say is circumstantial, but that's a heck of a lot of circumstantial stuff, all right? And along with the hair, okay? Now, they're not finished with their entire investigation. They're still looking at a whole bunch of other things. They're hauling a lot of stuff out of his house. They're checking that vehicle that they got hold of. They may find way more, but already I would say they have a very solid case. Yeah, a very solid case. I think that defense attorney's got his work cut out for him. And very impressive. Absolutely very impressed. I like to see when law enforcement does such a fantastic job investigating. And when I heard this, I'm like, wow. I mean, this wasn't a matter of they just got lucky. And sometimes this is true. Sometimes when you take a cold case, that what happens is it is only DNA that even pops up someplace that catches them, and they go, oh, look, that's great. With the especially with familial DNA these days. Now, this did have that aspect to it, but sometimes that's all they actually have. They don't even have very good other evidence. They really weren't investigating that hard. It's just it popped up. Other times they just get lucky. Maybe they're investigating something and they just run into, I don't know, like one guy, and I forgot his name. He was a Virginia serial killer. They were after him for he was a counterfeiter, and after they arrested him for that, they went to his this locker he had, and they found all these pictures of all these women who had been killed, and they're like, oh, look, we just caught a serial killer, So sometimes it's like that, especially with very cold cases. They're very hard to solve. Rarely do old serial homicides get solved, barring luck. But in this case, they may have said some luck, but my gosh, they did a lot of work. They did so much work, so much good work, in my opinion. The way the district attorney laid it all out, very, very impressed. So, just I would like to see more and more investigations go this way, because that's the kind of police work we need. And thank you guys. Thank you for doing what you do. That's amazing, because I know this case has been weighing on people's minds, especially the victims' families' minds, for a very long time. And it's nice to see, for once, something there's closure in something that is such an old case. Very, very nice. We've had, actually, fortunately, we've had, this year has been kind of amazing that we've had, they have arrested somebody in the Delphi case, and they arrested somebody in the Idaho case. Two more cases that I'm surprised didn't. Well, the Delphi case went on for a really long time, so I was quite surprised that they finally got somebody. They arrested somebody for that. We'll have to wait and see how that goes. Delphi was much quicker, but these are three huge cases that have people have been charged with the crimes in this year. So this 2023 is going well for some police work, and I applaud them. So anyway, that's my thoughts of the press conference and the evidence that I've heard of so far. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot more coming out, but good job. Anyway, thank you for being here. If you haven't been to the channel before, check the playlist, do like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.